Hey all, how you doing? Coming to you with the weekly thought from the pastor's desk. Today I wanted to spend a few moments to talk about Sabbath rest in the season of COVID-19. I find it quite ironic that many of us, including myself, are seemingly doing more work now in our in-home quarantine than we were in our regular work lives before this season of COVID-19. And I'm sure there's many factors to this, including the lack of daily transition rhythms we're used to, and the fact that work and home have now, for many, become a combined place. So let me just briefly give you 3 reasons you should be practicing Sabbath rest, particularly in this season of the Holy Week as we reflect upon Jesus. And the first is this. Let me share my screen with you, help get a little PowerPoint. The first reason is this, that God created into the fabric of the universe a work rest pattern. We see this pattern set out from page 1 of the biblical story, where God created the universe in 6 days, and on the seventh day, creation is brought to completion in God's rest. This work 6 days, rest 1 pattern is then set out throughout the Bible as something humanity is to follow in. Now, I want you to notice a few things. If you look at Genesis 1, first, it's important to understand that the number 7 in the Hebrew scriptures has a strong connection to the idea of fullness and completeness, which are these important things that we continue to long for. And it's important for us to understand if we want to understand Sabbath rest throughout scripture, right? Things like wholeness, fullness, completeness, they become something that we're all longing for, even if we can't quite put our finger on it. I also want you to notice that when you look at the first 6 days of creation in Genesis 1, they all end with the phrase, and there was evening and there was morning, right? However, the seventh day doesn't have such ending, and it's the only day that is blessed by God. It's almost like a endless day of rest in God's creative providence. And humanity is created into this place as the image of God, to rule and rest with God as their generous host. But as you know, for all of you who've read Genesis 1 through 3, humanity ends up being deceived by the evil one, and the fullness of this seventh day endless provision is lost. And now we're slaves to the land until we return to the dust of the earth, as the curses in Genesis 3 depict. But with that comes the second reason we need to keep Sabbath rest pattern today, is that keeping Sabbath points to Jesus as our ultimate rest. Despite us living in a world of no rest, throughout the biblical narrative, God's people are called to still practice rhythms of Sabbath rest, pointing them to a hope of one day having ultimate rest in the new heaven and new earth. Right? Israel was called to keep this pattern of work 6 days and then rest the seventh day, taking a whole day to stop their work. That's what Sabbath means, stop, right? To stop their work and look forward to the day of ultimate rest to come. But this pattern of sevens and rest went even further than just this weekly stoppage of work. When we look at Israel, they had 7 festivals throughout the year to bring longer periods of rest. And then every 7th year was a Sabbath year, bringing rest to all the land. And then all of this accumulated in the 49th year, 7 times 7, known as the year of Jubilee, when slaves were freed, all debts were forgiven, land was returned to its original owners, everything is forgiven, and everything is restored. Right? These patterns pointed to the depth of this rest to come, that it would encompass the whole person, not just a physical rest, but it would be giving a physical, emotional, spiritual, and even an economic rest when God comes in the fullness of his kingdom. Jesus then steps on the scene and identifies himself as the person to bring about this ultimate seventh-day rest. In Luke 4, we see Jesus quotes from the scroll of Isaiah proclaiming this year of Jubilee to be fulfilled in him, right? It reads this way when he's quoting. He says, "The Spirit of the Lord is on me because he has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim freedom for the prisoner and recovery of sight for the blind, to set the oppressed free, and to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor. And that year of the Lord's favor is a reference to the year of Jubilee. Jesus will bring about our ultimate rest. And as we reflect upon that during this Holy Week, as we come close to Easter, we find that something incredible happens in Jesus' death and resurrection. Jesus, on the sixth day of the week, died, and then his body rests on the seventh day in the grave. And then on the eighth day, he's raised to new life, right? Creating a new first day for this new creation, right? Jesus then calls us to give our allegiance to him, promising that he will return to bring about the new heaven and the new earth, where the ultimate seventh day rest will be restored. When we participate in Sabbath rest patterns, we're living lives that point to Jesus, who grants us ultimate rest, according to the book of Hebrews. And that leads to our third reason we need to keep Sabbath rest patterns, is that keeping the Sabbath is an act of resistance to the culture of now and an act of trust in God, thus securing our identity in him. Right? The world trains us in this culture of now. We must constantly work to get ahead. We must achieve, accomplish, perform, possess. We're bombarded 24/7 with the message that the more we consume, the happier we'll be. The more we do, the more successful we'll be. And all of this drives us to be multitasking people, driven to try and control more, to try and do more, just leaving us wrecked with restless anxiety. Sound familiar? We are told that in order to be somebody, you must achieve and possess. But when we choose to keep God's Sabbath pattern of work rest, we can stand against the lies of the culture of now and take our identity back. When I choose to practice Sabbath rest, I'm training myself in truth that my identity is not in what I achieve or what I possess, but it is found in being created in the image of God. And it's found in my allegiance to Jesus, right? When I choose to practice Sabbath, I'm choosing to trust God as the generous creator he is, that he will provide for all of my needs, that I don't need to accumulate every hour of my life to take care of my needs. So, church, let's create Sabbath rest patterns in our lives, pointing to the ultimate hope in this rest to come when Jesus returns and brings about the new heaven and the new earth, the kingdom in its fullness. I challenge you to set out at least a 24-hour period of time each week that you stop work and participate in things that are restful to you and your family. And for those of you whom life has slowed down in this season of quarantine, don't be afraid to spend extra time in Sabbath rest and allow God to meet you in that place in this season. Let me just leave you with the words of Jesus as he told us, "Come to me, all who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest." That's a word from the pastor's desk. I'll see you all next week.